From Chicago studios, this is the Muslim News on Muslim Network TV. Assalamu alaikum, I'm Samana Ziddiqui. First, the headlines. U.S. big city hate crimes spiked by 39% in 2021. U.S. healthcare firm to reopen infant formula facility. Ukraine war could push additional 47 million into acute hunger. COVID-19 cases rise in 4 of 6 WHO regions. Earth's atmospheric CO2 hasn't been this high in millions of years. And film about Muslim family that saved Jews wins grant. Our top story tonight. Preliminary data show a double-digit spike in hate crimes last year and a continued rise into 2022. Bias-motivated incidents in 37 major U.S. cities increased by nearly 39% on average. The 10 largest metropolitan areas reported a record 54.5% increase. Incidents targeting Asian and Jewish Americans accounted for the bulk of cases. The analysis of national police data was compiled by the Center for the Study of Hate and Extremism at California State University. Center Executive Director Brian Levin said the trend of bias incidents rising by 30% on average in 15 large cities is likely to continue. In 2021, anti-Asian incidents jumped 224% in the large U.S. cities, according to the FBI's annual hate crime report. Professor Brian Levin is going to join us later tonight for an in-depth analysis segment, so stay tuned and keep watching Muslim News. Abbott Laboratories has agreed to reopen its infant formula facility in Sturgis, Michigan. Abbott chairman and CEO Robert Ford said its reopening will ease the nationwide formula shortage. On Monday, the healthcare company said its agreement with the U.S. Food and Drug Administration will ensure production resumes and is maintained at this facility. This was after the U.S. District Court for the Western District of Michigan approved the consent decree. The facility was closed due to bacterial contamination after 4 infants who consumed baby formula produced there fell ill from bacterial infections. 2 of those infants died. The FDA said 80% of baby formula was in stock across the U.S. for the week ending May 8th. Abbott is the biggest baby formula manufacturer in the U.S. On Tuesday, the U.S. House Intelligence Committee received a classified briefing on unidentified aerial phenomena and unidentified flying objects. It's the first time in a half-century the two are being addressed as potential foreign threats to the nation. Committee member Congressman Rick Crawford said intelligence agencies must prevent potential adversaries from surprising us with unforeseen new technologies. There have been UFO and UAP sightings for decades, but the intelligence community now wants to take a proactive approach to get ahead of any threats from potential adversaries such as China or Russia. The Intelligence Committee is collecting data and conducting scientific analysis on any potential threat that might be out there, large or small. A recent report by the Massachusetts chapter of the Council on American Islamic Relations found that bullying and harassment of Muslim school children that was rife before the pandemic has returned. During the pandemic's remote learning phase, reports of school bullying essentially went down to zero. With classes now back in person, cases of bullying are going back up. However, adult Muslims working from home experienced an increase in harassment by their neighbors during that same period, the report shows. Barbara Dugan, CARE Massachusetts legal director, told the New Arab News website that school bullying numbers jumped back up to a typical level in September 2021. One most common example of bullying against Muslim school children is yanking the hijab off a girl's head, she said. Another is calling a Muslim child a terrorist. In international news today, nearly 47 million more people worldwide are at risk of malnutrition and starvation, according to an analysis by the United Nations World Food Programme. That's due to food and fuel supply disruptions because of Russia's war in Ukraine. There are 323 million acutely food insecure people in 81 countries this year. Ukraine and Russia are major exporters of wheat and maize. Russia is also a major gas and oil producer. Shortfalls due to the war are likely to continue raising prices for these commodities. Acute food insecurity puts lives or livelihoods in immediate danger. The WFP analysis predicts higher food and fuel prices, making food unaffordable for millions. Muslim parents are up in arms after an elementary school in the UK served their children pork instead of vegetarian sausages for lunch. A group of angry parents protested, demanding the Riders Green Primary School in West Bromwich explain the mix-up. Muslims make up around 70% of students at the school, and many follow Islamic dietary guidelines that prohibit eating pork. On Thursday, although the parents had pre-ordered veggie sausages, the children were given pork instead. A school spokesman said the error was on the part of the catering company that provides the meals. The school has filed a formal complaint against the catering provider with the Food Standards Agency. COVID-19 cases have risen in 4 of the 6 World Health Organization regions in the last week, the WHO chief said Tuesday. Director General Tedros Ghebreyesus said drops in testing and sequencing in many countries make it increasingly difficult to track the virus and how it's mutating. He said North Korea announced its first outbreak of COVID-19 with more than 1.4 million suspected cases since late April. North Korea's population is unvaccinated and many people with underlying conditions are at risk of severe disease and death, he said. The WHO has requested North Korea share data and information about COVID-19 so it can assist in fighting the pandemic. So far, over 6 million people worldwide have died from COVID-19 and nearly 520 million cases have been confirmed. An update on the historic Nakba resolution in the U.S. House of Representatives after the break. So stay tuned and we'll be right back after these messages.
If I could be you and you could be me for just 1 hour, if we could find a way to get inside each other's minds, walk a mile in my shoes, walk a mile in my shoes. Well, before you abuse, criticize and accuse, walk a mile in my shoes.
There are 16 million children struggling with hunger in America. That's 1 in 5 daughters, sons, neighbors, and classmates who don't know where their next meal is coming from. Yet billions of pounds of good food go to waste every year. It's time we do something about it. Feeding America is a nationwide network of food banks that helps provide meals to millions of kids and families in need. Visit feedingamerica.org to help them feed even more. Together, we can solve hunger. Together, we're feeding America.
Billboards are popping up all over the country with an...
Our neighbors don't realize that Muslims are absolutely opposed to ISIS.
Salam. My name is Abdul Malik Mujahid. I'm an imam in Chicago.
16 shots! No me! No justice! No me!
So how do we bring up the energy which can really have an impact on the world?
You need to build bridges of understanding among people, and we need to have America moving forward.
That lesson learned had brought the strength of humanity to America, which is the diversity.
Mujahid Talks, only on Muslim Network TV. Faithfully connected.
Assalamu alaikum everyone, it's your brother Zain Bika from South Africa. One of the first educational programs ever produced for Muslim children was the ever popular Adam's World series. The colorful and comical Muslim puppets stole the heart of a generation. Sound Vision will be releasing brand new episodes of Adam's World with the launch of a Adam's World app. Subscribers will enjoy new Adam's World episodes as they are released, as well as all the classic episodes of Adam's World. So visit adamsworldapp.com now to learn more, subscribe and enjoy new adventures of Adam and his friends. And let's keep helping tomorrow's Muslims today. Assalamu alaikum.
Adam's World. Believe me, there's a lot to see. Bismillah. Let's explore.
To stop this genocide, we need your help.
Welcome back. On Monday, human rights activists hailed a historic U.S. House of Representatives resolution recognizing the Nakba introduced by Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib. 6 progressive House co-sponsors support Tlaib's resolution recognizing the ongoing ethnic cleansing campaign against Palestinians perpetrated by Israel. Tlaib, a Michigan Democrat, is the first Palestinian-American woman elected to Congress. Her House resolution recognizing the Nakba and Palestinian refugees' rights commemorates the 94th anniversary of the Nakba, or catastrophe. Its co-sponsors are Democratic Representatives Jamal Bauman, Cori Bush, Betty McCollum, Marie Newman, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and Ilhan Omar. Keeping global warming below the threshold of 1.5 degrees Celsius by the end of the century will require halting construction of new fossil fuel infrastructure and closing many existing sites. That's according to a new study published Tuesday in the journal Environmental Research Letters. Some existing fossil fuel licenses and production will need to be revoked and phased out early, the study says. It estimates 40% of fossil fuel reserves at currently operational development sites worldwide must be left in the ground. Only then will the world have a 50-50 chance of adequately slashing carbon emissions and limiting warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius or below. In related news, climate scientists and concerned people are sounding the alarm as daily, weekly, and monthly records for atmospheric carbon dioxide levels are shattered. Meanwhile, the fossil fuel-powered capitalist economic system responsible for skyrocketing greenhouse gas pollution is plowing ahead. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration data shows the weekly average CO2 concentration at the Mauna Loa Observatory in Hawaii reached 421.13 parts per million from last week. That's the highest in recorded history. A screenplay inspired by the true story of a Muslim family that saved their Jewish friends during the Holocaust won a grant to help its development into a film. The Conference on Jewish Material Claims Against Germany announced the grant award on Tuesday. Written by Bosnian-American filmmaker Sabina Vahraka, the film is based on the real-life story of Mustafa and Zainab Hardash. The couple risked their lives to hide the Kaviljo family when the Nazis invaded Sarajevo, the capital of Bosnia and Herzegovina, during World War II. They provided refuge to their Jewish friends multiple times during the war. It helped the Kaviljos survive the Holocaust and eventually immigrate to Israel. During the Bosnian War in 1994, Serbian forces in Sarajevo perpetrated genocide against Muslims. The Kaviljos then pleaded on behalf of the Hardagas and helped secure the family's safe passage to Israel. Coming up next after the break is our in-depth analysis segment, so stay tuned, and we'll be right back after these messages.
Assalamu alaikum. This is Imam Malik Mujahid in Chicago. Just like you, I was moved by that Allahu Akbar lady. She stood her ground, fearful of none, for her hijab and for her education. Sisters and brothers, Indian Muslims are facing a genocide. India does not care for Muslim protesting, but it does care for the world opinion. Therefore, we must push the United Nations. The UN has a responsibility to protect. They must prevent genocide. Please sign this UN petition now. Get others to sign. It will help. Trust me, it will help. We need 1 million signatures, brothers and sisters. Please sign now.
Despite the development of a COVID-19 vaccine, millions around the world will not have access. We need a vaccine that's free and available to everyone, everywhere. It's time for a people's vaccine.
Dad, they took over my bedroom. Come on, come on. Okay, Dad. 1, 2, 3. Dad! You saved me. Dad?
Are you okay?
I'm fine, dear.
Your hero needs you now, and AARP is here to help. Find the care guides you need at aarp.org/caregiving.
We are Justice for All. Headquartered in the heart of downtown Chicago, Justice for All is a global humanitarian initiative dedicated to raising awareness for human rights concerns impacting vulnerable minority groups. Our diverse team of staff and volunteers, led by Imam Malik Mujahid, work tirelessly to help Justice for All achieve their goals. We promote policies that protect religious freedom, address the root causes of mass displacement, and recognize the plight of refugees and forced migrants. We promote policies that protect religious freedom, address the root causes of mass displacement, and recognize the plight of refugees and forced migrants. We promote policies that protect religious freedom, address the root causes of mass displacement, and recognize the plight of refugees and forced migrants. Together, we can continue to stand up for justice. Justice for all.
Welcome back. To discuss a spike in U.S. big city hate crimes, let's go to Imam Abdul Malik Mujahid. Over to you, Imam Mujahid.
Thank you, Samana. 10 people were murdered in Buffalo, New York, because of pure racist manifesto, which President Biden calls race-based terrorism. Now a report is saying that hate crimes are up by 39% in big cities. Big cities? That's the question. And the author of the report is with us, Professor Brian Levin. Welcome to Muslim Network TV.
Thank you for having me.
Professor Levin is Executive Director, Center for the Study of Hate and Extremism at California State University. So please share with us, what are the salient features of your findings?
Thank you so much for having me on, and salam to all my friends in the Muslim community. They have been such partners with us in fighting hate here in the United States and around the world, so thank you. So some really big things. Interestingly, for the Muslim American community in particular, there's good news. A lot of this replacement doctrine garbage, unfortunately, started with being directed against Muslims, as we've seen, this horrible kind of string of attacks. Obviously, New Zealand is the one that applies most directly to the Muslim community. And what was interesting, I think, is that last decade, 2015, 2016, and 2017, we saw this big spike, this what we call a head and shoulders top, with regard to anti-Muslim hate crime. And while anti-Muslim hate crime did not top the levels that we saw right after 2001, what we did see was more assaults in 2016 and 17 than during that time. But then, as violent Salafist jihadist attacks here in the United States, which were used as kind of this wedge catalyst to identify all Muslims of goodwill as somehow being involved with ISIS or similar groups, that declined. So what we saw, interestingly enough, is that these kinds of events really virtually disappeared. What I mean is extremist incidents involving Muslims here in the United States. So then what happened was the same replacement doctrine was then directed against Jews in 2018, Latinos the same year, and then Latinos again, and now blacks. Interestingly, hate crimes since that mid-decade peak, according to FBI data, really came down against Muslims, and it continued to fall, thank goodness, through 2019 and 2020. So by 2020, interestingly enough, look at the shift. We had the highest number of anti-black attacks that we've seen since 2008, when President Obama was having some political victories. But anti-Muslim hate crimes fell and hit their lowest level since the 9/11 time, and that's generally been the case. But it's not because those bigots who don't like Muslims suddenly like Muslims. They just redirected to the shiniest object in the room. In other words, immigration involving Latinos. Or in 2020, what we saw was blacks as some kind of group that was burning down our neighborhoods with these social justice protests, which, by the way, were 94% nonviolent. And then we saw a direction towards Asians as well. So the other is still Muslim, but the hot button around where bigotry should be directed. Bigotry can be defined by both the depth, but also the direction. And while Muslims are still in that constellation of villains along with Jews and blacks and socialists and even Democrats, the central focus is now more on Asians, Jews, and blacks than it is on Muslims. But here's the problem. When we see disputes going on internationally, it often reverberates back here in North America. One other quick thing, though. In Canada, we have seen some terrible attacks, of multi-fatality attacks in those recent years. So not every country is in lockstep. And in Europe, unfortunately, we see attacks against Muslims. So what's interesting is you really have to check your local listings. In other words, each country is different. What I found so interesting is Canada, which is in many ways, when you look at polls, a more tolerant country. That's where we've seen at least 2 in the last several years, multi-fatality anti-Muslim attacks. So unfortunately, what will happen is when the attention is being paid to some kind of dispute or conflict overseas, then we might very well see social media and broadcast players who in recent years were picking on Muslims and now have decided to go on to other groups to circle back and attack Muslims as well. And when we have 146 major conflicts going on worldwide, we know that's going to reverberate back here, including most recently, we've seen like Ukraine-Russia, a trickling of Ukraine-Russia kind of things. So that's kind of where we're at. We had a little bit of a pause, but it might be the eye of the storm as opposed to the storm moving all the way through.
Professor Levin, I mean, it is not of much comfort that Muslims are not a direct target of this hate, because hate continues to rise. I remember the first time I was subject of the hate, people was the person next to me, thank God, was being restrained by some people who were calling me Hindu. I didn't spare any moment explaining to him that I'm not a Hindu. Hate is a hate wherever it is go. But your research says that hate is rising 39% in the major cities. Now, major cities are where there's more acceptance, more tolerance, and more hubs of liberalism. Why major cities are seeing the rise of hate?
That is a great point. And let me point out, by the way, again, it varies from region to region. You go to India, look at the terrible hate crimes that are going on against Muslims there. Okay, so I don't want to say like, hey, everywhere.
That one probably is no longer a hate crime. I mean, scholars, Holocaust Museum considered to be at high risk of mass killings there, and Genocide Watch considered that to be at the 8th or the 9th stage of the genocide, 10th being the final one. So that has gone beyond a hate. I mean, that is just a very different story.
Absolutely, but what I'm saying to you is that impacts hate crime numbers as well. That gives us a data point. But absolutely, and that's why each country will vary. But the problem is these stereotypes are still there. These stereotypes that label Muslims as a threat are still there. What is not there is the immediate catalyst to get folks acting aggressively in for instance, the U.S. cities as opposed to, for instance, in India and elsewhere, which it's all over the country in India. But with respect to your question, here's what we've been seeing. Oftentimes, the hardcore, hard racist right looks at what we call the liberal blue, meaning Democrat, major cities as places to make a stand. And what we've seen is most recently that carousel. Interesting enough, listen to this. When anti-Muslim was going up last decade, in the middle of last decade, anti-Black as a proportion of all hate crimes was going down. At the same time that anti-Muslim hate crimes as a proportion of all hate crimes was going up. So we had a little bit of a realignment, and that occurred after the COVID restrictions took place. We saw the social justice protests occur, and we saw a big increase in 2020 in attacks against Blacks. June 2020 was the worst month for anti-Black hate crime for as long as we've been keeping data. December 2015 was the third worst month next to the ones in 2001 for anti-Muslim hate crime. And I just wrote a whole chapter in a book about Islamophobia on this trend with anti-Muslim hate crime. So in the major cities, what we've seen is the groups that are considered legitimate targets of aggression because of these fearful stereotypes and these conspiracies, which previously labeled Muslims as violent threats, are now labeling blacks as these kind of threats. And it's not just with regard to violence. Then it went into blacks are stealing the election. And then it went into blacks are changing our culture and invading our schools with critical race theory. So as long as you have a hot button issue that you can tie a group to, even indirectly, you'll see that happen. And one other thing, hate crimes against Jews are soaring as well. In 2019, the 3 largest cities in the United States, Jews were the #1 target. Then we saw a switch to Asians and blacks and Asians, and now Jews are coming back in again. And so what we've seen is that these stereotypes have a constellation of villains, and the ones that are on stage now are blacks, Asians, and Jews, with Muslims as a backstage target as soon as something can viscerally get to people's fears. And can I just interject one quick thing? I interviewed a fellow who who was the first person to commit an anti-Muslim hate crime in the United States after the Paris terror attacks, and he had said he was drinking and he was watching a lot of television which labeled Muslims in these stereotypical ways. So we have to be careful about the imagery and the stereotyping that label particular groups as targets for aggression. Right now, that targeting is on blacks, Asians, and Jews, and less so on Muslims, but that can easily switch if there's some event or some change in conditions in politics. Real quick, just bear with me. In the last time we had a conflictual midterm election here in the United States, which was October 2018, that was the second worst year for hate crime last decade. First was November 2016, the presidential election time. And what we saw, interestingly, is initially the main target during the summer, right, on television and online, were Latino caravans. By the time we went into election time, it was Jews. So we had also the worst month for Jews later in the year, whereas with Latinos, it was earlier in the year because these stereotypes that label the other can metastasize to include different groups. And what I'm afraid of, particularly now that replacement theory is being talked about, the initial target of replacement theory, both in the book, Le Grand Replacement, and by some of these terror attackers, were Muslims. So what I'm saying is, yes, I'm very happy that the average bigot is not attacking Muslims as much. But for the most hardcore homicidal ones, Muslims are considered an existential threat along with Jews and blacks. And that's why we still have to, particularly in a very highly charged election season, make sure that we reach out to all communities here in the United States where they live and in the languages they speak so that they report the hate crimes when they occur.
Now, for Muslims, one can, as you mentioned, someone you interviewed, and he was watching TV against Muslim news and things like that. But Asians, you can say that foreign policy towards China being competitive may have created the environment. What is facilitating hate towards Jews? Negative news about Jews is not as high as, does it point out to the prominence of social media where it is spreading more than the mainstream media?
It's not a great question, by the way. Here's the thing with Jews. Because Jews are very active in civic life in the United States, by the way, and it's a wonderful thing, just as Muslims are now coming into their own with respect to that, which is a wonderful thing. They are identified as groups that hold the levers of power. So, for instance, the Tree of Life terrorist who killed 11 Jews at a synagogue, hated Latinos, but his hate for Jews was different because he accused the Jews of being responsible for all the Latinos coming in. And what is so interesting, oftentimes we see people who hate Muslims also hate Jews because they believe that Jews are allowing Muslims to flourish in civic and cultural life here in the United States. So in other words, a lot of times the default group, no matter what the dispute is, always comes down to Jews. And unfortunately, even in some parts, just as we have people who are Islamophobes in the Jewish community, we also have anti-Semites in the Muslim community who promote these kinds of stereotypes. I am not saying that all Muslims or all Jews do this, but what I'm saying to you is these conspiracy theories spread across different groups that you would think would not hook into it.
Do you think they, from the racism and racist conversations, these anti-Semites and Islamophobes in the respected communities, do you think they borrow terminology and ideas from right-wing nationalists?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So what I'm saying to you is it could have, and by the way, this fellow who wrote this manifesto, a large part of it was about Jews. So what I am concerned about is that, all people of goodwill are in the same boat. And I want to let my Muslim friends know this, that we devote a tremendous amount of our research and resources to countering anti-Muslim hate. And you want to hear something? When I did research about anti-Muslim hate, and it was publicized back in 2015, a target appeared on my chest online as part of an article that had come out in a nationally syndicated piece that said I was kind of making this stuff up, when it turned out later on our data was reconfirmed by the FBI. So the bottom line is, when people are promoting and exploiting fear, they will not just include one group, but a series of interconnected groups. And that's why what I'm concerned about is, while we have a quiescent period right now with regard to anti-Muslim hate crime, as we've seen since 9/11, it can go down and then boom. If the atmospherics change, it can go up again. And that's why I speak at mosques and I reach out to all my dear friends in the Muslim community. And my dean, God bless him, who is Muslim, has been so supportive of our work. And I want my friends to know that you are not alone, that the good people of America stand with you, and that even when hate crimes go down, what we see is those stereotypes that label Muslims as some kind of enemy, those are still relatively high. So in other words, I guess what I'm saying is the dry kindling is there, but the gasoline hasn't been thrown on it yet. And we're hoping that does not change. But when we look at politics, and particularly when it's xenophobic, and particularly when we have the rise of what's called Christian nationalism, and people are running on that kind of formula, Muslims as a target are not far away from that. All that's needed is some kind of catalyst, some spark. And that's what I'm concerned about, because the atmospherics now that label the other, immigrants, non-Christians, as some kind of existential enemy of America is still out there. Also, unfortunately, Muslims, while it's come down a little bit, continue to be the most disfavored group in the United States, that kind of bounce around between atheists and Muslims in the United States. And we have to work on education with that. And that's why I'm so happy to work with my dear friends in the Muslim American community, both here and in Canada, to approach this. Because what we know is, when people get educated and have meaningful contact with people who are different and find commonalities, we know that prejudice that is the fuel to this hate crime declines.
Well, thank you so much, Professor Levin, for your time and for your work. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And we stand with all our friends in the Muslim American community. Salam. And as long as I'm running this center, we will make sure that we will counter Islamophobic hate. And I encourage folks to look at a new book by Oxford University Press, which is just about Islamophobia, and I was happy to participate in it.
Thank you. Back to you, Samana.
Thank you, Imam Mujahid. That's all from our Chicago studios tonight. Thank you for tuning in. You can find previous episodes and more on our YouTube or Facebook. For more content, keep watching Muslim Network TV or visit muslimnetwork.tv. Salam and good night.